making this up, the female clerk was flirting with him.
Wow. Well, there's always a mistake, and as they say, there are no smart criminals because they eventually get caught. But so, what do we know, Chris Woodward, if anything, at this point about the motive?
Well, a lot of people have been led to believe that it was over insurance denial because this is an insurance chief executive officer. It's a major insurance company. The fact that he wrote words on the casings, that led investigators and Joe Sixpacks out there to believe that it was somebody mad about the insurance industry. There were also reports, suspicions that maybe it was a hit job. But as one of the lead investigators said last night in a press conference, he said, and I'm not making this up, he said a lot of people's knowledge about so-called hitmen come from TV shows and films. Now, I get what he is saying here, but I've worked in news for 22 years, and there are occasionally stories about people in murder-for-hire situations. So I wouldn't rule anything out in terms of trying to determine what the motive might have been here.
Yeah, and I think that that's still obviously they're still going to have to parse through a lot of the evidence here and hopefully apprehend the suspect and be able to clarify exactly what happened and yet the response to this on social media and elsewhere has really been, I think, bizarre and also in some instances just frankly quite evil, because what we're hearing from a lot of people who are actually celebrating this cold-blooded murder just because of this gentleman's line of work. While there, of course, has always been a debate over the healthcare industry in the United States and, single payer versus, other types of options and how people are frustrated a lot of times with healthcare providers, that doesn't ever justify this type of vigilante justice. I mean, there was one report that I saw that there's an allegation that perhaps this CEO was using AI to help deny claims. And as you mentioned, Chris Woodward, the shell casing said delay, deny, depose, which, seems to kind of indicate some kind of motive like that. But, but this is all about America not applauding this kind of vigilante justice if that's what actually happened here. But it seems like a lot of people are rushing to that conclusion and then saying somehow that it's okay just because maybe they didn't particularly like this guy's line of work.
Yeah, there's been a lot of awful things on X, for example, where a lot of people go to share 2 cents. I know there was a story or multiple stories yesterday from a variety of news outlets about how Taylor Lorenz, the famous ex-journalist who likes to wear a mask and still belittle people for not wearing a mask and getting a COVID shot, even today. She was kind of celebrating or saying, he's an insurance executive. A lot of people don't like what they have to do. I mean, he's still a father. He's still a husband. He's still somebody's son, a neighbor, friend, what have you. That's a really terrible thing to say, and certainly you wouldn't want anybody celebrating your demise. Just because it's an industry that you might have disagreements with doesn't mean that's something that you celebrate. And really that it's a sad statement to show you where people are mentally today in the United States. It's an unfortunate thing, certainly a violation of the golden rule. I mean, I know there are a lot of people that don't like news types, and certainly we in broadcasting sometimes bring it on ourselves. But that's a terrible thing to say, even if it's someone that you might disagree with. You wouldn't want anybody saying that about your family member or friend.
Right. Well, and we saw some similar reaction with the attempted assassination of President Trump as well, of, some of these leftists that were saying, oh, sad that the assassin missed, and, other even more heinous comments. And, this really gets, I think, to the heart of America becoming a culture of death and really not recognizing and affirming the inherent dignity of every human being made in the image of God. And this is why our founders had the recognition that, yes, the government does carry the sword, as Romans 13 says in Scripture, that, and I believe in a very careful application of the morality of the death penalty, but this is why the founder said it has to be after due process, and it has to be in a legitimate judicial forum, not these kinds of clearly criminal activity. So what does that say to you about the commentary overall on just where we're at as a culture?
Yeah, it's really a terrible situation that we're in, and I think one of the reasons why people are as vocal as they are, and they say awful things, is just because social media, while it is an amoral product, a lot of immoral things go on there, and unfortunately, people looking to make a name for themselves, maybe get some retweets or reposts, whatever we're calling it now, they will say and do awful things to get jokes or kind of people applauding him. But you're right. I mean, the Trump shooting attempt back in July, there were a lot of people that were saying things like, if only he hadn't turned his head, or next time don't miss. Terrible, terrible things. And these are, people, celebrities, for example. It's not unheard of for celebrities to have stalkers, or maybe people make an attempt on their life because they're unhinged. And sometimes people carry out these dastardly plots to hurt or harm a celebrity. It's a terrible situation, and it's all the more reason why we as Christians really need to be consistent in how we act and talk about things. You could probably find, things on radio or things on social media that I shouldn't have said. So I'm not sitting here trying to say I'm a perfect person. We're all lost people in a dying world. But we do, as Christians, I think, need to make it a point to really pay attention to what we're saying about folks and be consistent in that, because we are supposed to be, we're called to be representatives of Jesus, and we should be like Jesus as much as possible from here until either we're called home or he comes home and gets us.
Amen to that, and really well said. Chris Woodward, he's a reporter and a newscast coordinator for American Family News, and you can go to afn.net and also follow them on X for headlines from a biblical and Christian worldview. And I also write a column for American Family News, generally every Friday, so my column will be posted a little later today. And Chris, to your point that this is so prolific, this type of disturbing content is prolific now, not just on the news, but also on social media. I was talking to a friend even earlier this morning, who was saying this is all over, her Instagram feed and her Facebook, and she's like, and this just is like really uncomfortable. And it reminded me that, kids have such easy access to social media, and if we're putting all of these news headlines and some of these things out there, a lot of these videos, it didn't used to be that you could just get that over and over and over again in your news feed, especially for kids. How concerning is that, do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely something that gets their headlines. I have been surprised just through conversations at the dinner table of what, how politically up to speed my two daughters are. One's 15, one's 11. And it's surprising sometimes what they are aware of. And I'm just like, I'm trying to think, like, what did I talk about at the lunch table back in the day, which wasn't that long ago, despite what they may claim. But anyway, kids are really up to speed on things. They notice things. You can't get like a smart home. If you have a smart home device that comes with a screen, those things display news topics. If you have a smart television, a lot of stuff will come across that to try to get your attention. Kids do notice things. And one interesting situation here with the murder of this chief executive officer is that the murderer has been displayed on television for going on 2 days now. I am shocked, Jenna, that the shooting has been seen or played as much as it has been. A lot of times news outlets won't do something like that. They might play it once or twice and then say, due to the graphic nature of this, we're not going to play it again or something of that sort. This is nonstop. It's been on 2 days. You can't help but notice it. If you're at an airport if you're at a restaurant, if you're in a hotel lobby, if you're watching television at home, you've no doubt seen this murder a couple of times now. And that is one of the reasons why I think people are kind of as hardened as they are, is because this stuff, it's become a normal type thing now, and we're just talking about it as if it's just another thing in the news cycle.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think we've become desensitized a lot as a culture to all of this evil that is just continually broadcast upon us because of how much we see in the media. And it's a good reminder that maybe, especially for parents, have your kids disconnect and not just sit in front of tablets all day. And even for us, I mean, there are times where I just have to take a break. I like my weekends to kind of just say I'm not going to pay attention to all of the headlines out there, but Chris Woodward, really appreciate it. And last question, real quick, as we head into the break, how close do you think they are at actually catching this guy?
I think they are very close. They're closer than we think they are. I wouldn't be surprised if it's something maybe even this evening or the weekend.
All right, well, maybe we'll carry that story here on Monday on Jenna Ellis in the Morning, but American Family News will have it up before then if it happens. Chris Woodward, really appreciate it. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
American Family Radio listening family, this is Bible League International, and we've spent the last few weeks telling you about persecuted believers praying for Bibles to be able to endure and persevere in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We told you about Pastor Rousses, whose 3 sons were murdered by a terrorist group that hates Christians, but rather than retaliate with violence, they invited these people to learn about Jesus. 200 have come to Christ. They need Bibles in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And in the Middle East, Pastor Yusuf and a deacon in his church were kidnapped in broad daylight. When the family could not pay the ransom, they killed the deacon, they tortured Pastor Yusuf, but with conviction today, that brother can say it's an honor to suffer for the Lord. AFR listening family, in the month of December, we're praying to bless 7,000 Bibleless believers in the regions of Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America for only $5 a Bible. $100 sends 20, $500 sends 100. Would you pray about it and call 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or give at sendbiblesnow.org. That's sendbiblesnow.org. And God bless you for caring.
As the world is changing around us, the ministry of AFA is staying anchored in God. If the Lord has gifted you to be a giver, we ask that you remember AFA in your year-end giving. As a good steward, you know the tax advantages of year-end giving. There's a variety of options for giving, ranging from cash gifts to stock donation to real estate. Some of the more creative gifts have earlier tax deadlines, so why not contact a representative of the AFA Foundation today to discuss your year-end gift? They can help you set up your donation now and make it effective by the proper date. Call 800-326-4543, extension 345. That's 800-326-4543, extension 345. Your support is key to our ministry in Jesus' name. Beat the rush by calling now, 800-326-4543, extension 345.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Stern. Stand by for news and commentary next. The propagandists in the mainstream media are suffering a psychotic break over rumors Elon Musk may buy MSDNC. A CNN panel the other day hyperventilated over the possibility that one of their far-left competitors might become fair and balanced. What I find truly fascinating is that when George Soros announced plans to buy more than 200 radio stations, nobody batted an eyelash. The fact is that Elon Musk is America's greatest champion for free speech. More and more Americans now getting their news from social media platforms like X instead of ABC or the cable users. According to Forbes, both CNN and MSNBC were recently beaten in the ratings by the Hallmark Channel. Most Americans would rather watch a Hallmark Christmas movie about a big city girl who gets fired, moves back home, and saves her town's bookstore than watch Mika and Joe. Now get this, Anderson Cooper gets a $20 million paycheck, but Americans would rather watch Operation Nutcracker. I'm Todd Stearns.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And, it's a Friday, and even just reflecting on the news of just this week. I mean, we were talking about the reaction to the cold-blooded murder of this healthcare CEO, and then we've been talking about the arguments at the U.S. Supreme Court that are actually questioning whether transgenderism is an immutable characteristic, and as if the High Court needs to even contemplate a case where anyone in America is actually affirming the gender mutilation of children. I mean, this is where we're at as a society, where we are actually having these discussions. And, I remember back in like the 90s when I was a kid, I'm an 80s, 90s kid. And, and thinking, oh, wow, when we get, beyond 2000, there was a show on, I think it was like the Nature and Science Channel, something like that. We didn't have like the 4,000 channels that everybody does today, but and all of the older people know what I'm talking about. But there was this show called Beyond 2000, and it was like how all of this, great tech and all this stuff is gonna foist us into a great utopia, and everything's gonna be so much better, and we're gonna advance so much as a society. And here we are in 2024, asking the question about whether men should go into the women's restroom on Capitol Hill. I mean, this is just, it's so insane. So to talk more about the cultural decay, where we're at and where we should be going, is our good friend Aaron McIntyre, who's a producer for The Steve Day Show and one of our favorite commentators here. So, Aaron, your thoughts overall just on news of this week and kind of where we're at in 2024. I would not have thought we would be having these kinds of conversations today.
Hey, good morning, Jenna. Thanks for having me on. Good to talk to you as always. And yeah, the way you led this is how I was actually going to talk about this. I mean, it is a sorry and sad commentary about our country. Even as much optimism as I'm feeling in the aftermath of what happened a month ago today, or yesterday, I should say, this is a sad commentary about where we are in the country, that the nation's highest court, our nation's highest court, has to weigh in on whether children should be given life-altering, permanent, quote-unquote, surgery in the name of gender. That in and of itself, of course, is a sorry commentary stemming from, as you know, Senate Bill 1 in Tennessee, which banned, I like to call it meatball surgery and chemical castration for minors. The left has given it all sorts of euphemistic names like gender-affirming care and gender transition surgery. No, it's meatball surgery. It's chemical castration. It's permanent practices so that 2, 4, 6-year-olds can feel like if they were born a boy, they can feel like a girl. Of course, it's all a lie from the pit of hell. And it's really mutilation is what we're talking about here. And this is what the Supreme Court is arguing this week. And like I said, it's a sorry commentary of where we are as a country. And there is something uniquely pernicious about this issue, Jenna, as I'm sure you're aware, uniquely pernicious, uniquely evil about this issue, whereas things like homosexuality, it's a perversion of God's design. Transgenderism is a rejection of God's design. That is uniquely evil, in my opinion. And you see it worn out in some of the just sorry arguments that some of these lefties on the Supreme Court are making. You saw Ketanji Brown Jackson, whom you're aware also, during her confirmation hearing for the Supreme Court. She couldn't define what a woman was because she's not a quote-unquote biologist. She compared not giving testosterone to little girls. She compared that to banning interracial marriage. Not to be outdone, though, Sonia Sotomayor interrupted one of Tennessee's legal counsels on the case, arguing on behalf of that Tennessee law, saying, how many more of these surgeries, how many more of these meatball surgeries do we need before we learn that there are irreversible damages to children? She interrupted that legal counsel and said, hey, hold your horses here. Every single medical procedure has side effects, even taking aspirin. She compared the permanent mutilation of children to taking aspirin. If that is not uniquely evil, I don't know what is. I pray the Supreme Court comes to the right decision here. Axios posted, or I don't know how they would know this, but the publication Axios, they reported earlier this week it looks like the Supreme Court will likely uphold Tennessee's ban, which would be a good thing. I'll tell you, though, Jenna, I'm worried about Neil Gorsuch. His history on these such issues, well, let's just call it checkered.
Yeah, and I agree with you that I'm very concerned about that, Aaron McIntyre, especially because Gorsuch did not say one word during the arguments. That was
Correct.
very odd to me because, regardless on cases where, he's gone all kinds of different ways, generally he always asks questions of both advocates, both sides. And the fact that he just stayed silent, I don't think that that's happened in any case that he sat on the bench, at least that I'm aware of. What did that potentially indicate to you?
Well, it's kind of what we just alluded to is this, and just off the top of my head, in big cases like this, I'm not a legal beagles following every single Supreme Court case, but on big cases like this, I do tune in quite a bit. And in recent memory, I can't remember a single time where Gorsuch didn't at least ask some probing questions, some good questions as well, but to just sit there in silence over all of this, that either means that he's got his mind made up or something else. So I'm worried about Gorsuch just because of his record. I'm hoping that because we're talking about children here not being able to truly consent, I'm hoping that kind of has made up his mind, but I am worried about that. I think also another tip of the cap, if this does go our direction, if this does go the righteous direction in banning this practice, and this practice should be banned across the board, this is just the beginning, is banning it for the youth. But I do pray that the Supreme Court makes the righteous decision to uphold this ban on this chemical castration and meatball surgery for children. We got to give the tip of the cap to Matt Walsh and the Daily Wire, because this entire bill all stemmed from an investigation Matt Walsh did of Vanderbilt University Medical Center's practices of giving this type of meatball surgery to minors, and their very cavalier and ghoulish attitude towards doing so. I mean, regardless of how this shakes out, he needs a tip of the cap. But I hope, like I said, Gorsuch doesn't pucker here.
Yeah, I agree. And I was also very concerned, not just about Gorsuch, and of course, because he wrote the majority opinion in the Bostock decision, which inexplicably took the term sex in the 1964 Civil Rights Act and said, oh, yeah, sure, that includes sexual orientation and gender identity, as if the Congress back in the 60s ever contemplated that. That was a wrong decision. But so not only that, but it also really bothered me, and I talked about this on air yesterday for listeners who were tuning in, that the Chief Justice and also Justice Barrett engaged in the language lie of the left by calling the ACLU advocate, who is a woman, calling her Mr., and then several of the conservative justices also use the term gender-affirming care, which we know that it's not. That's a lie from the left as well. And it seems like nobody from the conservative side, other than, a couple of pointed questions by Alito, which were great, I think, kill shots to their argument, nobody wanted to just call out what a farce this is. I mean, I was ready for Justice Gorsuch maybe to say, okay, well, so what if my kid thinks that he's a pirate? Are you going to say that it's fine to cut off his hand and put a hook in his place, or a leg, for a peg leg? I mean, how far do we go here in affirming the confusion of a child? I mean, but nobody was willing to go there. It almost seemed like they had to give deference and some kind of respect to this lie from the pit of hell.
Yeah, whoever controls the language controls the arguments. And the longer anybody who is to the right of Bernie Sanders, as long as they continue to kowtow and use the language of the left, they will lose to the left. Now, there are some gains being made on this issue. I see the very fact, like I said, the very fact that we're arguing this at the Supreme Court is a sorry commentary. Yet at the same time, if you win, that is a definite win. But ultimately, you have to reject the language of the left. I mean, this woman that you were talking about, the lady looks like a dude, the ACLU lawyer that you were just referencing, she was on CNN this week. She was on CNN this week talking about how kids knew when they were 2 years old that they were not in the right body. How do you not just reject that on its face? This is madness. It's cowardice not to call it madness. And as you were saying there, I was not aware of that when it came to the more conservative, quote-unquote, justices on the Supreme Court using the term gender-affirming care. But, boy, that's disappointing, and it doesn't make me any more optimistic.
Yeah, I agree. And, it is a sad commentary that conservatives, and I think you're right, anybody to the right of Bernie Sanders, I mean, and anybody who is just logical and who cares about children and not imposing permanent bodily harm. I mean, this is what we're talking about. Why are we at the point that we're at in the culture that we care more overall about not offending these lunatics, like this ACLU lawyer who's standing there arguing in front of the court, like dressed as a man, pretending to be a man. I mean, it's laughable in its absurdity. And yet, if the justices would not have engaged that, they would have gotten the whole social media gamut of, calling him bigoted and all kinds of, names and stuff. Why do we care about that more in today's society than standing up for truth?
Yeah, I mean, I think you were the one who tweeted this earlier this week. We went from Obergefell to this case in fewer than 10 years. This is Romans 1 playing out in real life. They exchanged the truth for a lie. It's ultimately spiritual. And does cultural change take place bottom up or top down from government? And, there's always been arguments, and I'm sure people a lot smarter than me can probably articulate why I'm wrong. But I think it's kind of both. It kind of goes both ways. If there's unjust and unrighteous laws, the culture will become more unjust and unrighteous. When the culture becomes more righteous and just, we will get more righteous and just laws. Ultimately, though, and I've always said this on your show, ultimately, though, it's a failure of the pulpit. It's a failure of the pulpit in the church in America that we even have to have these conversations. The men in the pulpit should be on the vanguard. We should have never gotten within 10 feet of this issue if pastors in America, and by extension their congregants, were bold and courageous in speaking the truth in love to their neighbors in their own communities. We're only going to be able to put an end to this madness when the people rise up and when the pastors rise up and say no more. It's only going to end when that happens and not a minute sooner.
I'm speaking with Aaron McIntyre, who's a producer for The Steve Day Show, who stands up and speaks truth every day. And I think that you're right, Aaron, that we have to go counterculture, and there needs to be a moment. I mean, like there has been for the what is a woman moment and some of these things where somebody just stands up and says, the emperor has no clothes. I mean, for those who are familiar, with that story, everybody was buying into the delusion that the king bought into, that somehow these magnificent clothes by these weavers who were totally just snookering him were invisible, and only smart people could actually see the clothes. So everybody was pretending to be smart, and it wasn't until the king, who was fully just in his undies, goes out in a parade going, "Look at my clothes," and a little kid stands up and is like, "Hey, you have no clothes on," and then everybody's like, "Oh, okay, we've been had." I mean, we need that kind of a clarifying moment in a big way in this country, don't we?
Indeed, yeah. I mean, and I think we're getting close to it. I mean, we've got allies that 5 years ago on this very issue, you would have said, "Wow, really them?" But a person like Elon Musk, the only reason why he is where he is right now in terms of relevance to right-wing politics in America is because he'll flat out tell you, the woke mind virus killed my son. It killed his son. Now, metaphorically speaking, I'm pretty sure he's talking about, because I believe it was one of his children was just embroiled in this trans madness thanks to this child's mother. But that's why he is on, quote unquote, our side right now. I mean, he's more liberal than you and I. Certainly he's more liberal than you and I would like to be. But we're fast approaching that moment. And like I said, we're making some gains elsewhere. The Ladies Professional Golf Association this week, they announced, hey, no more dudes competing against women in our competitions. There are some good things that are happening, but ultimately, when this argument is over, is when the groundswell of people across the board just stand up and say, nope, not happening on my watch.
Yeah, we need Christians to be the clarion moral voice in society, because if we won't stand up and speak the truth, then who else will? I mean, and God always leaves a remnant, and there's much more than a remnant in this nation currently. And I'm very encouraged by the direction, at least of this election, that voters were willing to stand up and say no to the utter nonsense of the left, but that's from the privacy of the voting booth. We need people to stand up and be recognized, and to say, and especially pastors, to say, here we stand, we can do no other, like Martin Luther in his time. I mean, there have been moments throughout world history where Christians have stood up and stood firmly for the truth, even at great risk to themselves, their reputation, even their families, because they stood firmly on the truth of God. We need pastors who are willing to do that. And that's why I'm really grateful for what you guys do over at the Blaze every day as well, and especially on Steve's show. It's one of the very few that I don't miss as often as I can, Aaron. So, what encourages you to stand up for truth in the midst of a lost and dying culture that's really going insane?
Well, I think it's this is not some sort of Gnostic special knowledge, but I think I've been fortunate to understand what true love is. We often think of love as this really hippy-dippy feeling, fuzzy good feeling, but it's not always that. Love is a motivation. You love somebody, you are motivated to do what's best for them. When my son, if he runs out of the driveway, and this has happened, by the way, when he runs down the driveway and across the street when I'm not looking, do I look at him and I say, "Oh, buddy, come back here. It's okay"? No, I yell at him, "Ben, you get back here right now." That's not really fuzzy. That's not really feeling good. But I love it.
But it's love. Yes. Love is an action. So well said. And we have to be yanking our culture back from the brink of despair. Oh, what a great message to end this segment on. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Heaven is a promise for believers in Jesus. And on the next Focus on the Family, John Burke offers a better understanding of the God of heaven. He shares amazing stories of near-death experiences that highlight who God is and His unconditional love for all people, including you. Next time on Focus on the Family with Jim Daly.
Focus on the Family is heard each weekday morning at 5 o'clock Central on American Family Radio.
For Christmas says basically this, that Almighty God did not stay in heaven to say, "I love you" from a distance, but He came to earth to draw near to us so that He could be touchable and knowable.
Dr. David Jeremiah continues his series, Why the Nativity, next time on Turning Point.
5:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
As Christians, how can we even begin to impact others when we live in a culture where truth is relative? It all starts with God's Word. Join us for Activate Summit 2025 at Cadence Bank Conference Center in Tupelo, Mississippi, June 12th through the 14th, 2025. The theme is Biblical Bedrock, building on the authority of Scripture, and it's designed to help you acknowledge the Bible's authority and submit to the clear teaching of Scripture. Hear from Frank Turek.
Evolution describes what does behave, not what ought to behave, right? It doesn't give you oughts, it just gives you what does happen.
Todd Herman.
God always uses evil for good. He is very intentional, and He intentionally chose you to live through times such as these.
And more. The main sessions are for ages 13 and up, while Activate Kids is a separate track for ages 6 through 12. Register for Activate Summit 2025 by visiting activate.afa.net/summit. Enter code EARLYBIRD20 at checkout for 20% off tickets before January 1st.
If you are 65 or older, you know this. Inflation is hitting everyone hard right now, especially when it comes to healthcare. Over the last 10 years, healthcare costs have skyrocketed by, get this, 230%. If you have Medicare Parts A and B, you know there are still out-of-pocket expenses like deductibles and co-payments, and they really add up. But here's some good news. MediShare 65 Plus is designed to fill in those gaps and help protect you from rising healthcare costs. At only $99 per month up to age 75, you get peace of mind at a price you can afford.
And MetaShare is trusted, too. It's been around 30 years. It's not some big impersonal thing. It's a community of people helping each other, business owners, pastors, retirees. People love it. MetaShare 65 Plus just makes sense. To learn more, give them a call. They're great to talk to. They'll offer to pray with you each time you call, too. Call now, 833-45-BIBLE. That's 833-45-BIBLE, 833-45-BIBLE.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. So let's turn to the subject of President Trump's nominees. And so, of course, there is the overall controversy about recess appointments. And you all know my take on that, which is that Trump should absolutely use the process available to him within the lines and the margins of the law and the Constitution and get his work done and get his cabinet filled and, let's go. But right now, the controversy, of course, is surrounding Pete Hegseth, who, according to a report from The Hill last night, speaking to senators who went on the record as a U.S. senator, but some of them didn't want to disclose exactly who they were because I think they didn't want to incur the wrath of people who are pro-Hegseth. They are saying that he's down by 7 or 8 votes in the Senate, so it's just a matter of time before he will withdraw. But just moments ago, Pete posted, "Thank you, Mr. President. Like you, we will never back down," and posted a screenshot of a Truth Social post from President Trump that says this: "Pete Hegseth is doing very well. His support is strong and deep, much more so than the fake news would have you believe. He was a great student, Princeton/Harvard educated, with a military state of mind. He will be a fantastic, high-energy Secretary of Defense. One who leads with charisma and skill. Pete is a winner, and there is nothing that can be done to change that." Meanwhile, Bill Melugin from Fox News also posted and said Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will attend the Army-Navy football game with President-elect Trump next Saturday, per source familiar with DeSantis's schedule. And that at least has been confirmed here by us, by me at AFR, from DeSantis's schedule as well. And there is so there's kind of this theory going on that DeSantis is just waiting in the wings here until inevitably Pete Hegseth will withdraw, and then DeSantis will be the next Secretary of Defense nominee. So joining us now to discuss is our good friend John Cardillo, who is a GOP strategist, former NYPD. And John, drama on the Hill. What do you make of it?
Yeah, a lot of drama on the Hill. And Mark Halperin, the journalist, who's certainly no conservative, right? I think he was pretty critical of the Trump administration in the past. He put out a really long, like a 4-paragraph post on X this morning, contradicting the reports that there are 7 no's in the Senate. And Halperin ends his, and I'll text you his post, Jenna. He ends it by saying, to summarize, Hegseth really didn't have all that bad of a week because not one senator said no on the record. And Halperin sums it up essentially by saying that he feels he'll be confirmed, that there's work to do, but he thinks they're going to fight and they're going to push him through. It's odd, right? I mean, you would think both of them would go to the Army and Navy game, Hegseth and DeSantis. Hegseth served in the Army, Ron served in the Navy. And so it is optically odd that Hegseth isn't going along with them, unless he is, and that's just not being reported.
Yeah, it is kind of a bizarre moment here, but you and I being fortunately or unfortunately pretty familiar with Trump world, my take on this is that Trump is all in until the moment that he's not. And, and even posting the last line of this saying, Pete is a winner and there's nothing that can be done to change that, kind of to me, that's sort of Trumpian for, he's still a winner even if he ultimately doesn't get the votes. And you do have, just your thoughts on that.
No, I think you're spot on. I think you translate Trump to English pretty well. And it's, hey, Pete, you're a great guy. You were around him as an attorney. I mean, you know him better than many people. But so I agree with you on that. And I do agree with the intent of a statement like that is, hey, buddy, you're a winner no matter what, even if I don't pick you. But, I really wish, Donald Trump would have learned something from 2016 about both personnel, letting the left win every time they throw a tantrum, even not the right. But really, I really hope this time around in that this except situation triggers something in Trump where he understands the real power of the presidency. You know, somebody very high profile that all of your listeners would know said to me one day about Trump, they said, Trump is the only, and it made a lot of sense, Jenna. They said, Trump is the only president in history who every day his White House counsel and other advisors tell him what he can't do. They had been around multiple administrations, and they said, every other president says, I want to do this, and his staff says, okay, we're going to work overtime to find out how to make that legal and constitutional and get it done. In Trump's case, guys like Pat Cipollone, and I think it became pretty well documented, they were just no men. You can't do that. Mm-hmm. You can't do that. You have no power to do that. But he really did. I wish he would just get Chuck Schumer on the phone and John Thune on the phone and say, guys, I'm a one-term president. I'm going scorched earth. I'm walking in the door lame duck. You keep this nonsense up with my nominations, and I'm not going to sign any bill that sends $1 to your state. And I will veto everything because I don't care, because I don't have to run again. So let's stop finally playing games after 8 years. And that would go a really long way. But for some reason, he won't do those things. And George Bush did that, and Barack Obama did that, and every other president, played hardball and used the tremendous leverage the power the presidency has. Trump still doesn't seem to get that he has that power.
Yeah, and that's something that hopefully once he actually takes office, we'll see a little more of that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I was in the room at some of those moments where people like Pat Cipollone and others would just, flat out say, no, you can't, which became a really frustrating thing for President Trump because, right. You're right that his aides typically would say, okay, we'll figure out how to get it done, and maybe not exactly in the way, that he was initially asking for it, because obviously that's why you have people like White House counsel, to tell you kind of, how you can get certain things done or, accomplished within the margins of the law and the Constitution. That's the point, right? But I keep saying he was one of the most underserved presidents because of that. And here we are with even somebody like a Joni Ernst, who maybe is just kind of being set up as sort of the face of the objection to Pete Hegseth campaign, if maybe there's a little bit of buyer's remorse here for the nomination. I mean, I've seen weirder things in politics, and especially Trump world, and I know you have too, than, Trump being forwardly supportive, meanwhile, telling the Republican senators, hey, let's make this to where he withdraws because I really want to put in somebody else, or I don't have as much confidence in Pete anymore because of the allegations, whatever the reason. Because if Trump were truly wanting Pete, wouldn't he be calling all of these senators, and wouldn't he be wielding that kind of power, and wouldn't he spend the political capital, because he basically has it in spades right now?
Yeah, he really does, and he's already lost 2 nominees, right? I mean, he lost Gates, and then Chad Chronister, and Chad Chronister withdrew because of the critiques around arresting the pastor during COVID. When DeSantis even realized the initial executive order was a bit overbroad, and they quickly amended it to exempt religious services. Well, Chad Chronister went on with that prosecution anyway, and apparently his sheriff's office is very woke. Being former law enforcement, living here in Florida, I know a lot of law enforcement guys and girls in the state, men and women, and they told me he's actually a very woke sheriff as well. Chronister, that he was a huge fan and still is of DEI initiatives in that sheriff's office. So I think Trump found out quite a bit. And even though Chronister put out a statement that he stepped down, yesterday or the day before, it was on Fox Business when I was watching it. It was a graphic where Trump said, he didn't step down, I removed him. I'll paraphrase, when I found out all the bad stuff I didn't know about. So now it looks like he picked 3 unconfirmable nominees. It doesn't look very good for Trump. I personally think he needs to fight till the end for Hegseth. I think he needs to go all in, because losing a third just doesn't look good. And then they're going to have his left-wing, labor secretary push through. It's optically just not good.
Right, because even if it's a valid reason, or say that Trump has simply changed his mind, for whatever reason, which he has the prerogative to do, because all of these people are nominated and then eventually serve at the pleasure of the president, and we've seen how he's just unilaterally dismissed other of his appointees in his previous term, and the president has the power to do that. It's still, of course, by the leftists in the mainstream media, will be manipulated into a negative. I mean, that's all that they did the first term by saying, look at how many chiefs of staff he's had. And it's like, yeah, that's no different than other presidents, but they're trying purposefully to pretend that the rules don't apply to Trump, and how the White House just generally operates doesn't apply to Trump. So I am. To your point, I agree with you that I am a little bit surprised that he's not going more full bore on Pete Hegseth. I mean, this post that came out just moments ago, I've been saying for the last about 48 hours, like, wow, we haven't heard anything from Trump pushing for Pete, and this was kind of middle of the road for Trump. I mean, it was something, but it wasn't, going all in, and it's not, making calls to senators. Maybe he plans to do that today. But what does he do optically if, let's say, he has changed his mind and he does prefer somebody like a DeSantis, and we can talk about whether the wisdom in that as well for DeSantis. Let's get to that in a second, but first, optically, how could that happen?
Well, optically, the message he's sending is that he's considering DeSantis far more than he's considering Pete Hegseth by going to the Army-Navy game with DeSantis, right? I mean, that's symbolic. You've got the president, and who is going to optically appear to be a real contender for Secretary of Defense, sitting at the West Point Annapolis game. And so the other thing that I think bodes poorly for Hegseth, again, you and I understand in the symbolism of Trump world, is that you're not really seeing Hegseth in and out of Mar-a-Lago. He's not attached to Trump's hip like the rest. So, you get the leaks, Rubio's there and this one is there, and, Kelly Loeffler was down there, and then she gets appointed to run the Small Business Administration the other day. So you're not seeing those leaks and the paparazzi photos of Hegseth going in and out of Mar-a-Lago, which is very telling to me. So there's a little bit of physical distance between the two as well. And so optically, I agree with you, Jenna. It sure does look like Trump is figuring out how to give Hegseth a soft landing and go in a different direction.
Yeah, so I mean, this remains to be seen. But let's talk about that eventuality. If however it happens, Hegseth withdraws, and then there's an opening, and Governor Ron DeSantis here in Florida is offered the SecDef position. It is the most powerful position in the cabinet. This would set him up, I think, well for a 2028 run. But there are obvious risks involved of just being around Trump world and being in a position, unlike governor, where he can operate independently, that he would now serve at the pleasure of Donald Trump. And they are friends now, but that could kind of change in a nanosecond. So, is this a good idea for Governor DeSantis?
Look, I don't think so. So, I know the governor. I'm friendly with the governor. I've been very supportive of the governor. But I haven't spoken to him or anyone on his team about this issue. My personal feeling, I don't want to lose him as governor of Florida, because he's phenomenal. It's the most amazing state in which to live. But I think there's another incredibly perilous risk for Ron DeSantis, and that's Susie Wiles, Trump's chief of staff, because she hates Ron DeSantis with a passion after being fired from his administration back in 2018-2019. And the woman has an unhealthy blood vendetta against the guy. So if I'm DeSantis, I'm going to leave the governorship of what's really become the most powerful state in the nation in many respects. I mean, down here, you know this, Jenna. I live in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale. I was in Miami for 11 years prior. Every major bank is down here, building massive skyscrapers. The media is down here. Half of the Fox News hosts now live down here. Mm-hmm. And so why give that up to be under the thumb of Trump and Susie Wiles, who can, like you say, in a nanosecond decide, this isn't working out. And then where does that lead DeSantis? But he stays as governor for 2 more years. Maybe he winds up SecDef in the second half of Trump's term. Maybe he runs for the Senate seat that's going to be coming up in the 28 election. He has so many options. I just don't see, as a career move, why he would want to do that, why he'd want to leave Florida and take SecDef.
Yeah, I honestly agree with you on that. And of course, I'm biased because I live in the state of Florida. I'd love to see Governor DeSantis stay as my governor for the next year, set this state up really well to continue in the free state of Florida. But even just talking about DeSantis's political career, the only rationale that I can contemplate on why it might be a good move for him is because you have J.D. Vance, who is the heir apparent to MAGA world, and DeSantis will have to somehow ingratiate himself to assuming that MAGA Inc. and Trump is going to persist as leading the Republican Party through the next term, which, unless something totally crazy happens, which is possible, that is the most likely outcome. And so then there would be that war between DeSantis and Vance where, he may be seen as part of MAGA world and even more powerful than Vance, just with what he gets done as SecDef. So that may be his contemplation. I don't know, but that's the only thing that I can see. But I think there is a really big danger in taking that position for exactly the reasons that you articulated, John. So we're already out of time. We can talk about this a lot more, but you can always reach me and my team, Jenna, at afr.net. Have a great weekend.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast